Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Story of Jesus Part 2. The Prophethood of Jesus Christ. The baby in the cradle speaks. As Maryam returned, the townsfolk watched with curiosity, horror, and disgust. As expected, a barrage of questions and criticisms ensued. Then she came to her people, and Allah made baby Jesus speak to them.
فأتت به قومها تحمله قالوا يا مريم لقد جئت شيئا فريا يا أخت هارون ما كان أبوك امرأ سوء وما كانت أمك بغيا فأشارت إليه قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وبرا بوالدتي ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا.
The Prophethood of Isa. When Isa was just a child, he found himself wandering into the temples to listen to sermons of the rabbis. Amongst a crowd of adults, he would listen to them intently, question them, and express his opinion without fear or intimidation. This, however, was not welcomed by learned rabbis, who felt threatened by having their authority challenged by a child. He was great at debating, and they often failed to respond to his questions. So instead, they tried to silence him, but he would not shy away from pressing his views. As Isa grew older, the wisdom and the special abilities that Allah bestowed upon him became apparent to those around him. As was the mystery and miraculous nature surrounding his conception and birth, his entire life was filled with unexplainable miracles. This was a clear sign to the people of his prophethood. All the while he called out to his people to worship Allah, the one true God. Surely Allah is my Lord and your Lord, so worship Him alone. This is the straight path. Now into his adulthood, on the day of Sabbath, the Jewish priests maintained a holy day for complete rest. Although this day was chosen by Prophet Musa to dedicate for Allah's worship, strange practices were maintained by the Jews. Followers could not light or extinguish a fire. Women could not braid their hair, nor could they call a doctor to save a patient who was in critical condition. On this day, Isa, who was well aware of the apparently sacred practices of Sabbath, picked fruits to feed a hungry child and lit a fire to keep an old woman warm, practices that violated the law. Isa was observant of the monetization that occurred in the name of faith and worship. He observed how the priests earned a hefty living through temples. He watched on as the temple had been transformed into a marketplace, selling sheep and doves for sacrifice, and was astonished at how the poor could not afford the rates. Isa failed to understand why offerings were burned in the temple when thousands of poor people were starving outside the temple walls. It was on this night that Prophets Zechariah and Yahya were killed, and Isa received the message from his Lord. In his first revelation, Allah commanded Isa to begin preaching the truth to the children of Israel who were clearly led astray. The message of Jesus. Jesus openly denounced the materialistic life of luxury and invited his people to lead a humble life. He appealed to his people to refrain from hoarding wealth and to spend their time in the worship of Allah so that they may have a prosperous afterlife. He preached forgiveness and mercy to each other and the creatures that roam the earth. It was very clear from all accounts that Jesus was not seeking worldly power, either as a ruler or through financial means. His mission was to establish the worship of one Creator in the manner the Creator commanded. He denounced the practices held by the Pharisees, one of the most prominent Jewish sects. It was in conflict with the Jewish superficial interpretation of the Torah. Isa informed them that he did not wish to denounce the Torah, but aimed to help people understand the true essence of its words. He knew they were hypocrites. They said one thing but did another. They taught about God, but they did not do things for the love of God. He further clarified some of the teachings of the Ten Commandments. For example, the sixth commandment prohibits adultery. However, this does not mean just physical contact between a man and a woman, but all unlawful acts that might lead one to adultery. This begins with the gaze. The eye commits adultery when it looks at anything with passion, and therefore lowering one's gaze would protect one from any unlawful desire. These teachings further threatened the position and authority of high priests. They thus began their schemes to take down Prophet Isa. The attempt to discredit Jesus. One day the priest dragged a known adulteress to Isa and asked him, "Doesn't the Mosaic law stipulate the stoning of the adulteress?" When Isa replied, "Yes," they declared, "This woman is an adulteress." Isa understood their plot. He knew that if he approved the application of the Mosaic law, he would contradict his teachings of forgiveness and mercy. He also knew that the priests had more sins to their names than the woman standing before him. So he announced to the men, "Whoever among you is sinless can stone her." This brought a new law pertaining to adultery. Only the sinless can judge sin. After all, none could judge a sinner but the Almighty, all-knowing. The miracles of Jesus. With Allah's authorization, Prophet Isa performed several miracles: talking in his infancy, breathing life into a clay bird, making it come alive, curing the blind and the person with leprosy, giving life to the dead. He had knowledge of what was hidden from others, and the sixth miracle was the table of food from heaven. The miracles are all listed in the Quran in one verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah.
إذ قال الله يا عيسى ابن مريم اذكر نعمتي عليك وعلى والدتك إذ أيدتك بروح القدس تكلم الناس في المهد وكهلا إذ علمتك الكتاب والحكمة والتوراة والإنجيل وإذ تخلق من الطين كهيئة الطير بإذني فتنفخ فيها فتكون طيرا بإذني وتبرئ الأكمه والأبرص بإذني وإذ تخرج الموتى بإذني وإذ كففت بني إسرائيل عنك إذ جئتهم بالبينات فقال الذين كفروا منهم إن هذا إلا سحر مبين.
This verse importantly repeats the phrase, "by my leave," meaning these miracles are performed with Allah's blessings. Thus, it is not really Isa who independently acted and raised the dead or gave life to inanimate objects, but rather it is through the power and permission of Allah that enabled him to do so. The sixth and final miracle we are told of in the Quran is famously known in the Christian faith as the Last Supper. In Islamic tradition, this event is referenced as table spread or the feast. This is the title of the fifth surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah. A feast for the followers. After 30 days of fasting commanded by Isa in service of Allah, the believers requested Isa to provide food from the heavens to break their fast. O Isa, son of Maryam, would your Lord be willing to send down to us a table spread with food from heaven? Commentators of this verse suggest that the apostles of Isa were not well-intentioned when they asked whether it would be possible for Allah to provide them food from heaven. Their question was seen as a sign of disrespect, challenging Allah's ability and asking the Prophet for yet another miracle because they lacked faith.
إذ قال الحواريون يا عيسى ابن مريم هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء قال اتقوا الله إن كنتم مؤمنين قالوا نريد أن نأكل منها وتطمئن قلوبنا ونعلم أن قد صدقتنا ونكون عليها من الشاهدين قال عيسى ابن مريم اللهم ربنا أنزل علينا مائدة من السماء تكون لنا عيدا لأولنا وآخرنا وآية منك وارزقنا وأنت خير الرازقين قال الله إني منزلها عليكم فمن يكفر بعد منكم فإني أعذبه عذابا لا أعذبه أحدا من العالمين.
This came as a warning. The better the blessing, the worse the curse of ingratitude. When Allah bestows His gifts on a person, it's a test to see whether we will be grateful and see His signs. And so, by command of Allah, the followers of Isa were treated with an amazing feast with foods from Jannah. It is related that thousands ate from the food sent down from heaven, and yet they never exhausted it. Next part 3, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ.